Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about how to get your financial life together, a guide for gay men. So, I've been getting some feedback about wanting to have more practical kinds of episodes on a few areas, and you guys have been very nice about emailing me or texting me with some suggestions, and I'm making a note of those, and those will be in future episodes. But there was some feedback that I got about requesting information on how to reduce financial chaos. So with my work in coaching, especially, sometimes in therapy, but sometimes more with coaching, guys are frustrated about their financial situation. The issue of money causes them a lot of anxiety, and they look for ways to reduce the anxiety. So that's what we wanted to do a little bit of today. And finances are an important part of your overall quality of life. Just like I say, your sex life is a part of your quality of life, or your nutrition, or your sleep, and certainly everything about your work, which I've talked about a lot. So when we talk about getting your financial life together, if you already have your financial life together, then maybe this would be less useful than if you don't. But I think everybody might need support for how to just think about your finances in a way that kind of gives you a leg up, that kind of gives you the self-empowerment to feel confident in how you're managing things. So based on my own experience and based on the experience of my clients and some of the challenges financially that they've shared with me and that I've helped them work through, are some topics for today. So going back, wearing my therapy hat for a minute, I want to talk about the clinical dynamics of money management. So when we talk about money management, the first thing that can come up pretty easily is anxiety about, oh no, am I going to have enough money for the things that I need and want? And a little bit of a depression is, oh no, I don't have all the money for the things I need and want. So another dynamic that goes into money management, I think, are just elements of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So what I mean by that is that, everybody has a little bit of traits on the spectrum of both OCD and I think ADD, attention deficit disorder. I'll get to that in a second. But in OCD, you can not have the full diagnosis of OCD and still have manifestations of OCD in money management. For example, people who keep very, very meticulous records on things like Quicken or QuickBooks or Microsoft Money or any of the financial apps, Rocket, I think, that would be something that they are reducing their anxiety by way of having increased organization. So the more organized you are, the more relaxed you feel, or the less anxious you feel. And that's a lot of this, because if you feel like you don't have your financial life together and that's causing anxiety, then the number one antidote to that is understanding and structure. Another part, like I said, is ADD, that, distractibility or impulsiveness or inattentiveness or just kind of doing things as they come, ooh, shiny object. If that happens with your money, that can undermine your financial structure as well. So things like impulse purchases, being quick to buy something online, we're all probably guilty of that. Things that involve impulsivity and distractibility are woven into our understanding of money and financial management. And we want to be aware of that. In general, we want to reduce the impulsivity or the distractibility, and we want to stick with our goals and make our purchases, especially, very deliberate. Susie Orman, the great lesbian financial planner who's written a lot of good books, talks a lot about impulsivity, that I think it was her exercise where if you go out shopping, don't go out with your credit cards, go out with your phone or pad and paper even, and write down the things that you see that maybe you would have bought if money were no object. And then, have your nice day shopping. Come home, give yourself a little rest. Then the next day, review your list of all the things that you saw that you were awfully close to buying and yet didn't. And then think about which ones do you want to go back and buy. Because she would say the odds are that if you had bought them on the spot, you would have spent a lot more and brought all your stuff home that same day. But if you wait a day, then you might not buy things as much. You might say, oh, actually, I don't need, number 5 on the list or number 6 on the list quite as much. I'm just going to stick with the 3 top things that I really need now that I've had a chance to sleep on it. So that would be one way of reducing impulsivity. Another kind of dynamic with the personality in money management is everything about entitlement. There was a commercial for L'Oreal hair color years ago, and they talked about its price. And the tagline was, "It costs a little more, but I'm worth it." And, maybe that was a successful sales strategy. And sometimes we go there, with kind of an entitlement of saying, I deserve this, or I'm entitled to this. So entitlement can be something that we just want to be aware of, because our ego can get in the way of financial prudence, especially with things like overspending. If we feel entitled to just buy everything we see or everything we want, we're likely to overspend. And so we have to kind of say, well, I deserve the best things in life. I'm not necessarily going to buy the best things in life today. Again, give it some time and space to think on it. Now, the other side to that is deprivation, where people get frustrated when they feel like they're depriving themselves or other people are depriving them. Think of the kid who wants a toy when he goes out with a parent, and if he doesn't get the toy, he might feel deprived, right? So we have to balance entitlement, which is the tendency to buy something, with the frustration of deprivation if we don't buy it. And so sometimes getting your financial life together means understanding where is your sense of entitlement when it comes to money. Are you spending a lot on some kind of luxury that probably is not the most prudent expenditure of your money, simply because you feel entitled to it? People who buy a lot of designer products just because they want to have prestige, even though they don't really need them, or they feel the need to, keep up with the next guy. The gay community can be that way, where if you're not seen wearing a certain kind of designer, then you're somehow socially less than. And we really need to challenge that, because if we keep up with status symbols at the expense of our long-term financial security, that's really not smart. We're going to regret doing that later in life if we overspent earlier in life just for prestige or entitlement. We also need to look at social pressures. Now, buying something from a social pressure because you feel like you have to keep up is not a good strategy, because it gets into things like your self-worth. Like, I don't feel good about myself, but I will feel good about myself if I'm wearing all designer clothes like my buddy Jonathan does, or something like that. And so we have to resist the social pressures where even if other people are spending on things that convey status in some way, if we can afford that and we want that and we like that, then it's not such a big deal. But if you're overspending because of social pressures, we have to kind of cognitively reframe and shift into affirmations of saying, I have value regardless of what I'm wearing. I have value regardless of what I'm driving. And you do what you can. And then we invoke Jerry Herman's song, I am what I am, and what I am needs no excuses. So if you can afford to have or wear or do something, that's fine. But if you're doing it out of social pressure, I would fight real hard to resist that, because it's more important that you take care of yourself for the long term. Another kind of clinical dynamic, I think, is about, if they say retail therapy, or going out and purchasing things as a self-medication for anxiety or fear or even depression. Oh, I'll cheer myself up by going up and buying something expensive. And, retail therapy is just not the right tool for the job. Therapy is therapy. And your shopping should be based on what brings you practical utility of what you need to kind of live and get by with, and also what brings you joy, whether that's material things or experiences. But again, that should be within a budget, and that you're not overspending because of a feeling state like depression or anxiety. You have to be able to deal with your feeling states without doing something like purchasing things, when what you really need is some kind of an emotional support. It's kind of the same thing with addiction. When I work with guys in recovery from meth or coke or whatever, and we kind of look at what they're self-medicating by using the drug. A lot of times, if you get to the emotional state that kind of drives somebody to drink or use too much, then we can sometimes take care of the drug or alcohol problem because we're actually getting to the core issue, which is about self-esteem or post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms or clinical depression or self-medicating for bipolar disorder. It can be a lot of things. So in some ways, retail therapy needs to have the same critical thinking and critical examination to it as self-medicating with drugs or alcohol too much. Another dynamic about getting your financial life together is balancing pretty constantly the short term versus the long term. So we might do things that are self-pampering to ourselves occasionally in the short term, and also we want to save and keep an eye toward the long term by doing things like contributing to our 401k at work or some other kind of retirement planning. So when my grandparents died about 15 years ago, they left me a good amount of money, $20,000, and that was very generous of them. And with $10,000 of it, I bought my motorcycle, my Triumph Bonneville that you might have seen in pictures online. And the other half I invested, because I said to myself, when you have a windfall like that, I'm going to spend some of it for something that brings me joy, to live now, because with someone who's just passed away, you realize how life is short. They were 93, but I still think life is short. So, but then in case I do live to be their age, I'm going to do what they did to have to leave that estate behind in the first place for my sister and my cousins and my mom. And it was investments. So I just kind of split the difference. And I think that's what a lot of people need to do. You kind of have to split the difference, maybe not exactly 50-50, but to split the difference between having a short-term versus a long-term perspective. It's like the old saying, save for a rainy day, even if today's very sunny. Also, I think another financial dynamic, again, emotionally, is about self-care. So self-care is a good thing to do. Some self-care involves quite a bit of an expense, like, therapy and coaching is one, spa services or a personal trainer or spa services, like a massage or a facial or Reiki or any kind of personal service that falls under that self-care umbrella, and that's great. But we also have to balance that with the self-care that we can manage, because if we're overextending ourselves financially in the name of self-care, that's not really self-care. We're kind of buying ourselves something that may be very nurturing, but if we can't really afford that and it's creating debt, then we're actually undermining our self-care for the long term. So we need to think in terms of what is efficient or cost-effective self-care. Also, I think we also need a lot of courage and determination to get your financial life together. A lot of times when I hear about guys are frustrated or anxious because they don't feel like their financial shit is together, then what we talk about is, having the courage to say, okay, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to start thinking and doing things differently. That's going to help me to have a better relationship to money and a better practical management of it. I'm going to see what I can learn. I'm going to see what I have to do. I have to see where my self-discipline is. I have to see where my supports are. And so I think the number one thing to start with getting your financial life together is a courage and a determination to start making the cognitive and behavioral changes that you would need to become more stable financially. The other thing about balance, kind of like the entitlement versus deprivation, is our needs versus our wants. When we're doing a budget, we might write down all of our monthly expenses, and then we might categorize them. Is that a need or is it a want? If it's your rent, it's what you need because you need a place to stay. If it is an expensive jacket, that might be a want because it's a nice design or color or something like that, but maybe you have another jacket that would just keep you warm at night. So we have to balance our needs versus our wants, and to come to terms kind of with the humbling of ourselves and coping with the disappointment. How to cope with not being able to buy something or afford something that's out of our budget without it being a depressing loss, but instead to make that an empowering choice. I mean, you could buy the jacket, you could buy it and run up your credit card or whatever, but that would be kind of a short-term reward, and in the long term you'd have to pay off a credit card with interest. So if you go without the jacket, let's say, or you wait to save up for it before you buy it, let's say, then you're coping with the short-term loss of not having your jacket with the long-term gain. And a lot of people who are either financially stable or even wealthy have taken that position, that they don't buy things on credit and then try and pay off their debt later. They save up for things and then make the purchase. And then they're also, of course, saving for emergencies, for spending on a line item that isn't determined yet. So in your budget, you should always have kind of an everyday bullshit line item for when things screw up. It could be a car repair, it could be a home repair, it could be some kind of medical related thing. But that's why a certain percentage of your income, I use about 10% of your income, goes into just, the bullshit line item. And then when something does happen, it sucks. If your car needs a new tire or there's some kind of repair at home or whatever it is, well, then you just take the money out of the savings and say, well, you know what? I've saved for this. I know that shit happens, and so I'm going to plan for it in advance. And ha 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 ha, you can't fool me because I've already saved up for this, so fuck you, tire. I mean, sometimes you have to have that mental defense of staying one step ahead of hardship to the extent that you can. Devastating things happen and that sucks. But for kind of everyday inconveniences like sudden unplanned expenses, they get a lot easier if they were planned expenses, but they just weren't specified yet. So we also have to look at kind of the clinical dynamics of depression versus anxiety versus fulfillment, and that's looking at existential happiness. So in my work with clients, if you call me, probably one of the first things I'm going to say is, how old are you? Because I use a lot of developmental psychology in my work, and I also use existential psychology. And what that means is that for every person, it's, why are you here? What is the meaning and purpose of your life that you find rewarding? And this is often through your work. If you were a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, first grade, for 30 years, and her reward was teaching literally thousands of children how to read. And so that was kind of an existential mission, was I am here to teach thousands of children how to read. My grandfather ran a grocery store in Virginia for 30 years also as well. And so his existential happiness was providing this store to his local community and really being integrated, a part of his local community and knowing lots of people. And then he was also a husband and father and golfer. And so, you have to think about for yourself, where does your existential happiness come from? And then think about how that is funded. So I mentioned a second ago, my grandfather was a golfer, that he really liked existential happiness through being with his buddies and playing a game that he liked and being outside and enjoying the outdoors. But, how that was funded, he belonged to a golf club, and a golf club had kind of expensive dues that my grandmother wasn't thrilled about. But, at least a portion of his budget was devoted to funding something that contributed to existential happiness. So but that's not the whole story, though. Your existential happiness can come from things that really are not expensive. Things like walking your dog when you get past the initial adoption fee of your dog, probably, and that's maybe expensive right when you get him or her, but is less so down the line. It's an investment of a long-term, hopefully, relationship with your pet. That's an existential happiness that doesn't really have a price tag to it. So one of the strategies is, can you create experiences that fit within your budget, that have a relatively low price tag? So taking a walk with a friend outside or going on a hike, that really doesn't have much cost associated with it. So think of the things that you enjoy the most. Think of the times when you are happiest in your life, and then just think, how do I fund that? Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how getting your financial life together includes planning. So part of the self-empowerment that reduces financial anxiety is just planning. So let's start with your income. Your income is just all the accumulated compensation that you get. You might have a primary job. You might have a side hustle. Certain people might have a passive income, like if you've written a book and you get royalties on that, or here in LA where I am, an actor might have income from a television or commercial or movie that he did sometimes years ago, and residual checks would be an income possibly many years later. So it's planning about your income and then understanding what that is. If you're on a salary or a wage, you can kind of calculate it because the salary is a fixed annual salary, or your hourly wage is a predictable hourly wage that doesn't really change much. That's another whole story, is that wages have been stagnant too often. But it's also times the number of hours. So your income can be predictable that way. Other people might have incomes that are not predictable, like the actor, how many jobs he books in the year, or the Uber driver, of how many rides they get, or the graphic artist who's a freelancer about how many gigs do you get hired for as an independent contractor. And so your income might fluctuate, but with people who are self-employed, you get kind of an average income that you plan with over several months of data. My course that I'm going to be offering, I'll do a little plug for that, on gay men opening their own business. And we talk a little bit about being a W-2 employee with the IRS as a salary versus being a 1099 freelancer. And both of them had advantages and disadvantages. Another aspect of planning is just your banking. When I worked with unhoused folks with mental illness in Hollywood in the 1990s, one of the challenges was that if you have real bad credit, you can't get a bank account. And that was a real problem, because with people trying to stabilize their lives, having a bank account is a really important thing. And so we worked with different programs where people with bad credit might rehabilitate their credit into being able to having things like a checking account. So you want to plan, where is your banking, which is a big question. The big evil banks like Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase, or where none of them are, charities, but you just have to plan what you need. Like, I have a business checking account and a business savings account, and then I have a personal checking account, several savings accounts that are earmarked for certain things, like saving for my taxes, or like I mentioned earlier, saving for emergencies. And then with my husband, I have a joint household checking account for everyday expenses. So we've done planning, that word again, on how we do our banking. And then we also have a credit card. The Chase Sapphire Reserve card, it sounds like a commercial, has great travel benefits. If you have good credit, you can qualify for that. And that really is a fun credit card if you qualify. And then we try to pay that off every month so that debt doesn't accumulate, but the points do. So where you get your credit cards, in addition to checking and savings accounts, would be part of your banking planning. Another planning element is budgeting. So, living by a strict budget that balances your income with your expenses can be tedious. A lot of people don't like budgeting because they feel like, it's like being a little kid with an allowance or something. And it's a bit tedious because you have to have either Quicken or QuickBooks or Microsoft Money or somehow of writing that down electronically or physically. And so, a budget is just this commitment to yourself that you're always going to earn more in the month than you spend. Because if you spend more than you earn month after month, okay, that's where the debt comes in, an overwhelming amount of debt, like thousands or tens of thousands on credit card debt, which can feel overwhelming and anxious. The way to reverse that is to have a fairly structured pay down. And some of the books by Susie Orman, Jane Bryant Quinn is another one. I don't recommend Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is anti-gay. And so I've read his books. They have some interesting financial advice. Maybe you can get one, at a flea market or something. But I don't believe in patronizing anti-gay figures in the marketplace, whereas Susie Orman is an open lesbian. That's supporting the LGBT community with the exact same thing, a good financial planning book. And those books would have budget exercises in them, most all of them. Another aspect of planning is investing. I gave my grandparents example of they invested during their whole lives so that by the time they were older, they could pay for care in a nursing home as elderly people, because the investments had grown over literally decades of time. And that's one thing that if you're not doing, you need to. Some guys I work with are investment experts. I've worked with guys who are, some of the leading financial leaders of our country they don't need my help with that. If anything, I need their advice, but I'm probably helping them with other things. But I've also worked with guys who, have a 401k program at work, and oh well, they just didn't get around to enrolling in it, which is very self-sabotaging behavior, because you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, that you're doing all that you can with your investing, and having a financial planner, a certified financial planner, which is a credential. I work with a gay one, again, patronizing LGBT professionals wherever I can, named Thomas Donnelly of Donnelly Investments. And he has been an enormous help in helping me and helping manage my mom's estate about what to invest in, stock funds or bond funds, or very treasury savings bonds. There's different things that you can invest in, individual stocks, of a promising company. So investing is a really big topic, and that's really the topic of like a financial planner, not really me as a therapist or coach. But the thing about investing where I might overlap with a financial planner is the idea of cognitively, again, seeing the short term versus the long term. And with investing, it's also about anxiety management, because when you invest your money in, say, a stock index fund, that might go up or it might go down, depending on the performance of the overall stock market. And so part of the self-care in investing is you get to be excited when it gains. Warren Buffett said compounded interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And you could also, need to kind of manage your anxiety when the stock market goes down. And it can be an anxiety-provoking feeling to see the value of your investment account go down. I use Vanguard, but there's certainly others, TD Ameritrade, Fidelity. And you don't have to be wealthy to do that. I think a lot of people think, to be a Fidelity customer or a Vanguard customer, you have to be doing, tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds. That's not really true. You can invest. If you take 5 cents and you put it in a piggy bank on your dresser top, you just invested, So, investing can be very, very modest, or it can be very, very elaborate, and it just depends on your circumstances. Another part of planning, like I said, is savings. Saving for the bullshit line item, I call it. But you also might save for other things too, like a vacation or the holiday season, shopping. You might save for some kind of a piece of furniture or home repair. You might save for something you want to do for yourself, like having a hair transplant or something like that. But planning your savings and what that's going to be goes a long way towards self-care and reducing anxiety. Like I said, I got in the habit of putting away 10% right away of everything I earn in a week into a savings account. And then that just is a discipline that it means, having some savings there for if you need it suddenly for some kind of an emergency, especially. Another thing about planning, which I go over in my course about gay men opening their own business, is about taxes. Tax law is very, very complicated. A W-2 employee, a 1099 employee, filing quarterly taxes when you're a self-employed person in the United States, and understanding if you're an employee and an employer, what your taxes are, your Social Security tax, your federal income tax, your state taxes if you have them, like California does, your property taxes if you own a home. There might be other taxes. I have a corporate tax because I'm a professional corporation. So I go over that in the course, but that's something about planning, because planning for your taxes really is a form of savings. If you have a pay stub and they have federal or maybe state line item withdrawals on your pay stub, though that's tax planning, and you may or may not get some of that back after your taxes are calculated after the end of each year. Another part of planning, to get your financial life together is your insurances. So Thomas Donnelly, when I had a quarterly meeting with him just the other day, was talking about insurances. And I said, as someone gets older, when do you have to, how long do you have to keep doing life insurance? Because my life insurance has a quarterly premium that's kind of high. And he said, you need life insurance to replace the income that you would have had if you were working that someone else relies on. So let's say you and your partner have a nice house or condo and you have a mortgage, and you might need to have life insurance, both of you, so that if something happened to one of you where you died, you would have some insurance payment coming in that might help you to keep your house if you can't afford the mortgage all by yourself. So, and that buys you some time to get a roommate or possibly sell the place and downsize, or it just buys you time. But things like life insurance would be important, if you passed away, leaving a loved one who's somewhat dependent on you. Another disability plan might be a long-term disability plan. If something happens where you can't do your current job or any job, having a long-term disability plan, which many employers give you automatically, but if you're self-employed, then you might need to look at trying to get one if you can, just in case something happened to you where you were to become disabled from an accident or an illness or crime or just, the shit that happens to people, and it's an extra level of peace of mind. And then, of course, planning your spending. So part of budgeting, it's your income, but it's also about what you're spending on. And I think with spending, you're kind of planning the big expenditures in the course of a year, say maybe a car purchase or a vacation or higher ticket items. And then, of course, spending in the everyday stuff, which is, a rent or mortgage or car insurance or a car payment, your food, your utilities, your entertainment, your clothing, all of these things is what you're spending on. And asking yourself the question, is what I'm spending how I want to be spending? So I've done that in my business once in a while. I'll look at all my outgoing business expenses. I just did this recently. And I've said to myself, is this an expenditure I really need to be doing? So in some cases, yes, because it's critical to my business, like a certain amount for advertising my practice. In other cases, I was spending on things that I didn't really need, like I think some newspaper subscription or something that I wasn't even reading. And so, you always want your spending to be in line with your values. And just asking yourself, is this spending in line with my values? If so, that's great. Check off peace of mind. If it's not, then it's ripe for cutting and then reabsorbing that expenditure into your budget and maybe reallocating it for something else. And so the last section about getting your financial life together, I just call it talking. Who do you talk to about your finances? What kind of conversations need to happen in order for you to be on solid ground and feel organized and confident? So I think one of them is about yourself. Do you need to have a talk with yourself and say and own where your financial mistakes are? Are you being impulsive and spending too much? Are you putting the values on the wrong things? Are you forgetting about things that you need to remember? So it's talking to yourself and having the tough conversation about where you need to make changes based on your goals and based on being in service to your financial stability. Of course, the other difficult conversation might be with a partner. So when you're partnered, part of the relationship skill is to talk about your allocation of your resources of time, including your free time, and your money and your energies, like for things like household projects or household chores. So I was working with a couple recently that wanted some support for navigating ground rules of their open relationship. Because I have a special training in consensual non-monogamy and polyamorous families that was a year-long training from Sexual Health Alliance. And a lot of couples need that support, because opening your relationship or spicing it up if you're monogamous, all of that requires kind of a sexual communication. And, I'm also a nationally certified sex therapist, so I work with sexual things more specifically maybe than other types of therapists who aren't sex therapists. But I always say you have to have the difficult conversations. So, one of their questions was about how do you, in your free time, in the evenings and the weekends away from work, how do you balance time with your partner with time with tricks or playtime with others if you're going to have a non-monogamous relationship? Because your free time is a finite resource. And your money is a finite resource as well. So you and your partner might have to talk about your relative incomes to each other. There's an episode about in gay male relationships when your incomes differ greatly and the kind of compromises and discussions you might make in that situation. You might talk to your partner about what the spending plan is. You make an agreement that you're going to spend a certain amount, let's say, on a vacation that you've planned, or you're going to spend a certain amount on a big home improvement that you want to do, or you want to talk about student loan debt and some kind of a plan for the two of you to pay that off. And it's talking about what expenses you kind of have as an individual that would really be something that you would take care of, like buying your own clothes or something, versus the things that he might on his own as an individual. And then there would be stuff, that's a joint collective between the two of you, expenditure or possibly income. I work with some guys who own property together, and then they get a rental income from the renter of that property, and then that becomes an income not from their respective salaries, but from the couple due to a shared asset. So talking to your partner about money is not fun, but it's not about whether it's fun. What you want, the reason to talk to your partner about money issues sometimes is because you want to be on the other side of that conversation. On the other side of that conversation might be a clear understanding of yourselves and each other, and as much as you ever can, a solid plan about what you're going to do or not do with your finances that just seems prudent, wise, that you can feel confident about. The other part of talking, I think, is about your friends or peer group. There's kind of the joke that, friends will tell each other about, the intimate details of their sex life before they reveal what their annual salary is. In our society, it's almost a taboo subject. I mean, I have clients in the luxury of online psychotherapy where, everything is confidential except basically harm to yourself or harm to others. And they still don't tell me what they earn. Sometimes they do, and we talk about, financial planning, the emotional side of it. But sometimes they don't because they feel shy about it, I don't know, sounding too high or too low or whatever. And I'm not going to judge. But, friends don't usually talk about money all that much in your peer group. But you might gain a little bit of some kind of tips about money management that comes from peer support. A little while ago, I mentioned about the Chase Sapphire Reserve credit card. That's a good travel card, and other points that you can use that for. And I told a friend about that, and then he and his partner got that card as well and enjoyed it. They owe me a commission at Chase Bank. But, I've talked to people about that because in my experience, it's been a particularly good benefit card to have. There are others that are similar. I think American Express Black Card and stuff like that. But you might get tips, or you might ask a friend who just had his car repaired where he got it repaired, and he might recommend somebody who's affordable and doesn't cheat you. So financial things, might be exchanged with friends about things like tips, even though you might not talk about other things about your financial life that would just feel a little too private. Another thing about the talking is with your parents. Some parents will talk to their kids fairly formally, even their adult children, and kind of talk about what their plan is in terms of how they structure their will, or what their policy is about lending adult children money. Some parents do that, and some parents don't. Some parents partially support even adult children. I work with a couple guys who they wouldn't be able to afford to see me without their parents helping them to access their therapy or their coaching, but their parents support that because they're resolving some problems that everybody agrees they need and want to work on. So you might talk to your parents when you need help of some kind and why. And if you are a parent, I work with several gay male couples who have kids. So you might have to talk to your kids about money issues, about, their allowance, or when you pay for something or when you don't. And again, it's that balance of raising your children that is some kind of a spectrum between entitlement and deprivation. You don't want to spoil your kids so that they're just hard to take because they're just so entitled and hoity-toity about things financially, even though, you feel like you want to give your kids the best of everything. Generally, it's not good to just buy them everything everywhere, because that it can be harmful to their personality and make them feel entitled. At the same time, though, you don't want to be so miserly with your kids that there's some kind of a deprivation, that, if your kid wants to go to a camp or something with all of his friends and all the parents are paying for their kid to go to camp, well, if you can afford it, maybe you do that. You don't say, no, we're gonna save that, if that's really important to him. But you have to have talking with your kids about how you're going to handle financial matters, and then that's behavioral modeling when you're raising children to have a healthy relationship to money. Another part of talking, I think, is about around your community and altruism. My husband works in fundraising for a college for student scholarships and student facilities, and he has a lot of talking to people about what their altruism is, where their personal values are. So they might want to name a scholarship in the name of their child who passed away and never made it to college age, and they memorialize their lost child by creating a scholarship for someone else. Or think of the things that you might have altruism about, whether it's a little bit or a lot. You might support a local LGBT charity, or you might support a national LGBT charity, or you might support some other kind of organization like your alma mater school, or something you're interested in, like animals or the environment or the arts. And so you're talking to the community sometimes about what you want to do, and what is available and what needs the help. People like directors of development or fundraising executives would be happy to talk to you, or the leadership of, say, a nonprofit organization would probably talk about what they need donations for. Maybe they need somebody to underwrite the cost of a new playground at the community park or something like that. And then I mentioned earlier the talking with a CPA, a certified public accountant. Not everybody needs a CPA because they can use TurboTax or something like that, and they're paying their taxes and stuff like that is very easy. I really needed a CPA because I'm self-employed as a professional corporation, and I wouldn't know how to do all that without literally hiring a CPA to educate me on the taxes and the procedures involved in running a corporation. It gets a little complicated. I talk about that in the course about gay men starting their own business. And then I mentioned also, the certified financial planner. And the certified financial planner would guide you on things like your long-term retirement investments, but he or she also might advise you on the insurance coverages that you need, or how to maximize efficiency of your household expenses, and give you the benefit of working with other people who maybe solved some of the same financial problems that you have now. That's kind of what I do a lot with my clients. Is I can't name names, or I can't say too much where they're like, oh wait, that's Bill and Don, we know them. I can't do that ethically, but I can give examples about how couples or individual clients in the past have solved problems just like theirs, because fortunately a lot of the same solutions apply to the same problems over and over again. Just like with this, if you implement some of the things that we're covering today, you're going to be on your way to financial stability. Just like with my course, you're going to be well on your way to opening your own business if you want. So I don't mean to sound like a total commercial for that, but if you're interested in the course, that's going to be available, and I'll talk more about how to access my courses in future episodes. But also, if you want therapy, if you live in California, for managing the anxiety about money, for example, or coaching if you live somewhere else and you want support for how to make some of these things specific to you in your individual situation. So you know how to reach me, or should. Call or text, WhatsApp, whatever, 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778. And you could also email me. Ken@gaytherapyla.com will reach me as well, or Ken@gaycoachingla.com. So if you're in California and you're a therapy client, you can get information from gaytherapyla.com. If you're outside of the state and it's coaching services, life, career, relationship, sexual, that would be gaycoachingla.com. And that's how you would get in touch with me for individual consultations, one time or weekly or bi-weekly, or whatever you want it to be. I'm very flexible on frequency, because people have different schedules and different budgets. So you don't have to commit to a weekly session working with me, because I want to be sensitive to people having different budgets all over the country or all over the world. So thanks, and I will see you next time.